Yeah, I think it's first, begin with the end in mind. Know what you want to be over an extended time horizon. Evaluate the ways in which you can close that gap. It's build, it's buy, or in some cases, it's a lie, and figure out if you can go form a partnership with somebody who might ultimately be an acquisition target, but in the short term is just an alliance for you. Then it start to develop that target list. I think if you have the luxury of working directly with an investment banker or an advisor, you should, because they can take a lot of that legwork off of anybody who's working that 60 hours a week, which is a part-time job in my world. And use that to then feed into a realistic model. Don't paint the model as Pollyanna. Things will go bump in the night. You'll lose a customer or two along the way. You'll lose a key teammate or two along the way, and you have to try to model that in to the best of your ability. Because if you model everything in the perfect world scenario, we just don't live in a perfect world. It doesn't happen that way generally.
How do you think the difference between the why for a specific acquisition, right? Hey, should we buy this specific business or not? Versus, as an organization saying, yes, we are going to go do acquisitions, and here's the overarching kind of criteria that we're going to look at as we evaluate things, sort of without a specific target in mind.
Yeah, I would say that, really all organizations would benefit by just having that lens open to say, I should think about acquisitions as an alternative to building. Because if you're only single threaded in one area, say organic growth or say acquisition growth, you're really probably not doing yourself justice. Now, you have to be careful because people can get deal drunk, as I like to refer to it, where they're going to get that deal done come hell or high water.
Yeah.
And that's not a good discipline. You want to be smart about what you're buying. You want to be intellectually honest with yourself around the cost of that acquisition as compared to growing it out organically.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting perspective, right? You can always buy or build as kind of the first lens. And so as you say that, it strikes me almost like this, why do acquisitions? It's really not why do acquisitions. It's more like, what are we trying to do as a firm, right? Where are we trying to be 3, 5, 10 years from now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, get your ownership on board early and fully enrolled. And the way you do that, I think, is by effectively painting the picture of the alternatives. If you know that you've got to close a gap, you've got to be able to align with your ownership around, do you want to build, buy, or ally? And sometimes it's not mutually exclusive. Sometimes you can do 1, 2, or 3 of those things. But if building is a better option, and that's the way the owner is absolutely convinced, then you probably don't want to waste a lot of cycles on trying to go buy. Because at the end of the day, ownership writes that check. And if they're not fully bought in, all of those management hours that became a distraction on due diligence something could have been more effectively spent on, say, trying to build something. So upfront alignment with your owner is absolutely essential, and making sure that he or she or they are bought into the vision that is part of the instruments that you would use to close that gap.
When we think about some of the pitfalls of people when they're doing due diligence, is they think they need to know everything out of the gate. And if I heard you right, you correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you guys are a little bit more, you've gone through the work of being sophisticated to know what you need out of the gate and what you can do later on down the road. Like, I don't need to see copies of your leases. I don't need to see contract copies. I don't need to see environmental studies. Like, here's the 5 or 6 things that I need to validate the fit, make sure it's part of our why, make sure the cultures are aligned to get the valuation right. Like, we need to answer those 4, and then we'll get the offer, and then we'll do all the other painful sausage making down the road. Is that how you guys think about it?
Yeah, that's correct. We really think about it in 2 phases. There's the initial upfront, can we get to the dance. And then there's a confirmatory due diligence, which comes after the LOI. Let's go confirm what we believe to be the case. Make sure there's no showstoppers. Make sure there's not some undisclosed litigation, customer concentration risk, human capital risk, something that is going to really materially derail the deal. And as long as everything checks out, then you move forward. If it doesn't, you pull the ripcord and you punch out.
Yeah, I love the phrase you use, confirmatory, right? It should be we've already asked maybe the question, hey, you have no HR problems, right? No, we don't. Okay, I'm going to put my value in based on that fact, and I'll validate it later. And if it turns out, no, you actually you lose a third of your staff every year, maybe there's a problem there. maybe it's not you told me to be.
Yep, exactly.
Is that just kind of going back to the workload things? I know a lot of the audience is probably thinking, hey, I'd love to do it. It just sounds like a lot of work. Do you staff differently then once it gets a little bit more serious? Like when you have signed a letter of intent and you're going to close, that's in our experience, that's the workload goes up in that period. And so is it still the same group of folks that you go to and just going to say, hey guys, it's going to be a little bit heavier for the next couple of months while we get this thing done?
Yeah, at that point, we'll pull in a few subject matter experts into the discussion. People who will be more deep, for example, on like an HR issue, really dive into the nits of the HR issue that might be a potential problem, to understand it and advise us. But it's nobody's sole job. It's a little bit of everybody's job, and we all just dig deep when it comes up. I'd love to tell you that we have the resources in our 350 teammates to rush out and just dedicate a strict M&A team and then an integration team. We don't, which is not how we do business. But it's worked for us.
Yeah. And I guess some of that comes down to sort of the pace, right? I'm sure if you all as a leadership team sat around and said, hey, we want to go from 1 a year to 4 a year, okay, hey, we can do it. We just probably need to bring in a full-time body to help us do it, or we need to find those hours elsewhere. But at 1 or 2 a year, you guys seem to have the internal capacity and expertise really to do that.
Yep, that's accurate.
You brought in an interesting word of integration, where I want to go next. When do you start thinking about life after the transaction?
Long before the transaction.
That's the right answer.
Yeah. We focus on integration early on. We build our investment thesis around what parts will be integrated, what parts can be integrated, and what teammates will stick around after the integration. Because that's the limiter in our business. We have to have people to go do the work, and that work is essential to realizing the investment thesis.
Yeah. And so it starts out early on of sort of thinking with the end in mind. What point does it get very tactical in terms of, okay, you're reporting to this person, we're going to move the financials over to here, this is what we're going to do on the brand? When do you get tactical on that integration?
Yeah, so typically that's about 30 days before the confirmatory due diligence is complete. So as we're going through that confirmatory due diligence, we're going to make sure that the way that we've conceived an org chart, a financial process, an IT system is really the way it is, because if it's not, the integration is going to change dramatically. And we always want to be mindful of that.
Any advice? So there's probably some leaders out there who have never gone through an acquisition or maybe done one or two. Any advice if you were there with them, how would you counsel them to start thinking about the why behind an acquisition?
Yeah, I think the first filter is the cultural filter. Make sure that this is a company that you really want to work with over the long haul. It's pretty rare and it's exceptionally unfortunate when it does happen. Thankfully, it doesn't happen in our case. When a company goes in and just guts an organization, that's not the way you're going to win the hearts and minds. But if you're going to retain the teammates, as we often do, then you want to make sure that these are teammates who are culturally aligned with your organization. Once you get past that, then it's being disciplined around what it is that you're trying to achieve, what is your why for this acquisition, and looking that really intellectually honestly in the mirror and saying, am I better off doing this on my own? Or is the return on investment better if I go out and scale more quickly through an acquisition? Because acquisitions are not riskless.
Any other kind of tips or wisdom or pitfalls or any other advice you'd give to business leaders who are looking to start doing multiple acquisitions and having that part of their corporate strategy?
I would say the other thing I would add above and beyond what we've already discussed would be realistic around what you can get done and what will ultimately cash flow out for you as a business. We are living in a world where, in the not too distant past, people were hitting peak valuations. And, if you're a business that's, trading at a 5 and you want to go out and buy an 18, oof, it's going to take you a long time to pay for that. Long, long, long time, or an insane amount of synergy. And you have to be realistic about it, because not everybody can achieve those 18 multiples, and not everybody should want to even pay those multiples. So make sure that you're realistic about what the acquired company is worth and what it would do to your overall valuation when you're in that situation.
That's great advice, because even the 5 to 18 multiple, I know in those multiples, that sounds to me like someone who's in a traditional services business wanting to go buy a high tech growth tech company. And that would raise the signal of like, why are we doing this? Like, valuation aside, why are we doing this? Is this really what we want to go do? And we're a truck broker for truckloads moves, and we're gonna go buy a supply chain software play. So that I would say that I'd add on to yours, Tom, of I think you have to have that why nailed down out of the gate. And it's not just why acquire this specific business, but it's where are we trying to get to? Where do we want to grow to? And then when you look at a specific business, it's how does this fit into what we're trying to do? And I think you're right. The economics, you can't downplay it. You can't get over your skis on it, and you can't get deal drunk. So I think there's an element of discipline. But that said, if you know your why, you have a better view of your economics on the transaction than if you're just firing a dart at the dartboard, right? I like to use the analogy sometimes like, hey, Tom, you and I, we could get together and with no existing relationship in the business, we could go buy this thing and it's going to have a certain set of economics to us. If, however, we had an AFS and we had these 4 pillars and we had these specific gaps and we knew if we closed this gap, man, 10% of our customer base would jump on it. We'd be able to sell maybe this much with a little bit of a cut. Like, now you can start to see where the value is to you, and you can, what could to the seller be perceived as more aggressive valuation, but to you, like, that could still be a fraction of what the economics are worth to you if you know your why well enough. How do you guys staff for that internally? I know you've got a fairly full day job. You don't want to spend your days working in models. Like, you could have 2 or 3 of these things on the go at the time. How do you manage that workload?
Yeah, thankfully, we've got a core team who have been through this so many times, and they've been through it together so many times, between our owner and founder, between our former CFO, and between our former head of M&A, who is running a business unit for us now. These guys can all finish each other's sentences and have a lot of confidence in the modeling. So we'll all get together. They will have done some great work on it. We'll come to some reasonable conclusions, and then we'll want to discuss those conclusions with the target to say, are we thinking about this the right way?
So it sounds like you have a sort of an assigned sort of committee of folks who, when something comes in, you, Tom, quarterback it, and then you sort of divvy it out. Okay, guys, here's the information you all look for normally. Do your work, and then we'll reconvene and review it as a group.
Absolutely. Yep.
And is that always, are you the quarterback for that, or do you have other folks on your team who quarterback that sort of herding of cats, which you can sometimes feel like internal projects?
Yeah, well, our owner is super helpful in that regard because he's, again, been at so long and so knowledgeable in this stuff. He'll look for things that I might miss. And if my workload at that given point in time is just prohibitive for me to take that on, he's more than happy to do it himself, and quarterback the process. So it's a team effort is the short answer.